The cowboy ruined his own engagement with 7 words nobody in that room was prepared to hear. The wineglass shattered against the wooden floor just as Wade Bennett grabbed the young woman's hand. Dust from the desert storm still clung to her boots. Across the ballroom, the piano stopped mid-song. His fiancée stood frozen while every rancher in Red Hollow turned to stare. Then Wade looked at the trembling woman beside him and spoke loud enough for the entire ranch to hear. What happened next would haunt Silver Spur Ranch for years. If you love emotional Western stories, stay with us till the end. The dust storm rolled into Red Hollow just before sundown. It came low across the desert floor like a living thing, dragging red sand through the streets and rattling every loose shutter in town. Folks hurried off the boardwalks with hats pulled low and coats wrapped tight around their faces. Horses stamped nervously beside the hitching rails. By the time Eliza Brooks reached the edge of Silver Spur Ranch, the whole sky had turned the color of rust. Her mare limped beside her. One hoof dragged slightly through the dirt, making a soft scraping sound every few steps. Eliza kept one hand on the reins and the other pressed against the leather saddle balanced on her shoulder. The saddle was heavy, freshly stitched, worth enough money to keep the landlord from throwing her and her little sister out before winter. If Wade Bennett paid her, that was the part worrying her. The gates of Silver Spur stood open wide tonight. Lanterns swung from cedar posts. Carriages lined the long gravel drive. Music drifted through the storm wind from somewhere near the main house. Rich people music, violins, piano, laughter that sounded too easy. Eliza stopped walking for a second. She looked down at her boots coated in red dust, at the worn cuffs of her brown skirt, at the small tear near one sleeve she'd patched 3 different times. Then she looked at the giant white ranch house glowing beneath strings of lantern light. She almost turned around. But then she remembered Daisy, coughing through the night in their little cabin near the train tracks. So she kept walking. The closer she got, the more impossible the place felt. Cowboys in pressed jackets stood near the corrals, smoking cigars. Women in satin dresses moved beneath the lanterns like floating ghosts. Silver trays of whiskey glasses passed between guests. Somewhere near the back porch, somebody was roasting beef over mesquite firewood. The smell made Eliza realize she hadn't eaten since morning. A ranch hand noticed her first. "You lost, Mom?" "I'm here to deliver a saddle," she said quietly. "For Mr. Bennett." The cowboy looked uncertain. His eyes drifted toward the crowd gathering near the dance floor. "Tonight ain't exactly good timing. I won't stay long." Before he could answer, another voice cut through the wind. "Well, this should be interesting." Eliza turned. Vivian Mercer stood at the top of the porch steps holding a crystal glass of red wine. Everything about her looked expensive. Cream-colored silk dress, pearl earrings, gloves too clean for Arizona territory. She smiled without warmth as her eyes moved slowly over Eliza's dusty clothes. Conversation nearby began to fade. People were staring now. Vivian descended the steps carefully, one hand lifting her skirt from the dirt. "And who might you be?" she asked. "Eliza Brooks?" Vivian glanced toward the saddle. "A delivery girl." The guests around her chuckled softly. Eliza tightened her grip on the leather. "I repaired Mr. Bennett's saddle," she said. "I was told to bring it before tonight." "Well," Vivian smiled thinly. "You certainly picked a memorable moment." A gust of wind swept through the yard, throwing sand across the lantern light. Somewhere behind the crowd, thunder rolled over the desert mountains. Eliza could feel every eye on her now. She just wanted to leave the saddle and go home. "I'll set it inside the barn," she said. "Then I'll be gone." But Vivian stepped directly into her path. "Oh no," she said sweetly. "You came all this way. You should at least see the party." The guests laughed again, not loudly, worse than loudly. The kind of laughter people used when they wanted someone to know exactly where they belonged. Eliza felt heat rise into her face. She tried to move past. That was when Vivian accidentally tipped her wine glass. Dark red liquid splashed across Eliza's dress. A few women gasped. One man muttered something under his breath. Vivian pressed a hand dramatically to her chest. "Oh dear," she said. "What a mess." The wine dripped slowly from Eliza's skirt into the dirt. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Then Vivian looked down toward the porch floor, where some wine had splattered across the polished wood. "Well?" she asked lightly. Eliza stared at her. "Well, what?" Vivian tilted her head. "You spilled it." The silence tightened. "You expect me to clean that?" Eliza asked. Vivian smiled. "I expect people to clean up after themselves." Somebody laughed harder this time. Eliza's fingers curled around the saddle strap so tightly her knuckles hurt. For one dangerous second, she imagined smashing the heavy leather straight across Vivian Mercer's perfect face. Instead, she stepped backward. "I'll leave," she said. The wind howled across the ranch, and from the far side of the porch, a chair scraped sharply against wood. Everyone turned. Wade Bennett finally stood. Eliza had noticed him earlier without really looking. Tall, broad shoulders, black coat dusty from riding, a face carved hard by sun and bad years. He'd spent most of the evening sitting silently beside Vivian, while businessmen and railroad men drank around him. But now, every eye in the yard followed him as he crossed toward Eliza. Slow, calm, dangerous. Vivian's smile faltered slightly. "Wade," she said carefully. He ignored her. He stopped directly in front of Eliza. Up close, she noticed the scar near his jaw, the tiredness around his eyes, the faint smell of leather and whiskey and desert wind. His gaze dropped briefly to the wine soaking her dress. Then he looked at Vivian. "You done?" he asked quietly. Vivian blinked. "I was only trying to. That enough?" The softness in his voice somehow made it worse. The party had gone completely silent now, except for the storm wind rattling the lantern chains overhead. Vivian folded her arms. This woman interrupted our engagement celebration, carrying horse tack through the middle of guests. "She came here to work," Wade said. "She came here looking like that." Eliza swallowed hard. Wade looked at her then, really looked at her. At the dust on her boots, the trembling in her hands, the pride she was trying desperately not to lose in front of strangers. Something shifted in his expression. Not pity. Something sharper than that. Vivian stepped closer to him. "Honestly, Wade," she said with a nervous laugh, "can we please go back inside?" But Wade reached for Eliza's wrist before she could step away. The touch startled her. Warm, steady, firm enough to stop her from running. The entire ranch seemed to stop breathing. Then Wade Bennett looked directly at the crowd and said, "She won't be leaving." Nobody moved. Nobody even blinked. Wade's grip tightened slightly around Eliza's hand. "She's my wife." The world went dead silent. A glass shattered somewhere near the porch. Vivian stared at him like she'd been shot, and Eliza Brooks forgot how to breathe. The storm outside slammed dust against the ranch windows, while the party stood frozen beneath the lantern light. Nobody moved. Nobody even reached for another drink. Wade Bennett still held Eliza's wrist, not tight enough to hurt, just enough to keep her standing there beside him. Vivian laughed once, sharp and shaky. "That isn't funny." Wade's eyes never left her. Wasn't meant to be. A murmur spread through the guests like wind through dry grass. Old ranchers exchanged looks. Railroad men leaned closer together, whispering into whiskey glasses. One woman near the piano quietly set down her fork. Eliza finally found her voice. "Mr. Bennett, Wade," he said calmly. She stared at him. This man had barely spoken 3 words to her before tonight. Now he was standing in front of half the Arizona Territory, calling her his wife. Vivian stepped forward, face pale beneath the lantern glow. "You are engaged to me, not anymore." The words landed harder than thunder. Somewhere near the back porch, Deputy Boone removed his cigar slowly from his mouth. He looked from Wade to Eliza with narrowed eyes. Vivian's expression changed then. Not heartbreak, something colder. "You'll regret humiliating me like this," she said quietly. Wade finally let go of Eliza's wrist. "I already regret half the things in my life." Vivian turned sharply and disappeared into the ranch house while her father's railroad associates hurried after her. The party collapsed after that. Music stopped. Conversations broke apart. Guests began collecting coats and climbing into carriages beneath the dust storm. Eliza stood alone near the porch steps, clutching the repaired saddle against her chest. Wade lit a cigarette beside one of the cedar posts. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, she said, "You mind explaining what just happened?" The corner of his mouth moved slightly, not quite a smile. "You needed help. That wasn't help." "No," he admitted. "Probably wasn't." Wind pushed grit across the wooden porch floor. Eliza looked toward the dark road leading back into town. "I should go home." "You can't." She frowned. "Vivian Mercer's angry enough to ruin your life by morning," Wade said. "And if folks hear I lied in front of half the territory, the bank'll come after me before winter." Eliza blinked slowly. "The bank?" Wade crushed ash from his cigarette onto the railing. "Silver Spur's in debt." That surprised her. Silver Spur Ranch was the biggest cattle operation within 50 miles. "You're joking." "I wish I was." He reached into his coat pocket and handed her a folded document. Bank letterhead, Eastern Capital and Land Company. Payment notices stamped in black ink. 6 months. That was all they were giving him. Eliza looked back up at him. "So what now?" Wade stared out toward the corrals where horses shifted nervously in the storm. "Now," he said quietly, "I need a wife." The silence between them stretched. Then Eliza laughed once under her breath. "You picked the wrong woman for this. Maybe. You don't even know me." "I know enough." She folded the paper carefully. "My sister's sick," she said. "I can't get dragged into rich people problems." Wade nodded once like he already knew. "I'll cover the doctor in Tucson." Her throat tightened slightly. "And your house," he continued. "I'll pay off the debt." Eliza looked at him carefully then. Men usually wanted something when they offered help. Sometimes kindness came with chains hidden underneath it. What's the catch? No catch. That's a lie. For the first time that night, Wade actually smiled a little. Small, tired, honest enough to make her uneasy. "You stay here," he said. "Act like my wife until the bank signs the extension papers. 6 months. After that, you walk away with the house deed in your name." Eliza stared toward the giant ranch house glowing against the storm. It looked warm from outside, but somehow lonely too, like nobody inside it ever laughed for real. "You really think those people in there will believe this?" she asked. Wade glanced toward the dark windows where silhouettes still moved behind curtains. "No," he said, "but they'll believe me." A ranch hand approached carrying Eliza's saddle. "Boss?" the young cowboy asked nervously. Wade nodded toward the barn. "Put it in the tack room." The cowboy hesitated before quietly saying, "Yes, sir, Mom." Eliza noticed it immediately. The change. One sentence from Wade Bennett, and suddenly the entire ranch had to look at her differently. Even if they hated it, the wind softened slightly as the dust storm finally began drifting east across the desert. Far off near the train tracks, a locomotive whistle echoed through the dark. Wade opened the ranch house door. Warm light spilled across the porch. "You coming inside?" he asked. Eliza looked at the empty road home one last time. Then at the letter from the bank still folded in her hand, and finally at the man standing quietly in the doorway. Waiting for her answer, she stepped inside. The warmth hit her first. Pine smoke. Coffee gone cold. Wet leather drying near the stone fireplace. Silver Spur Ranch looked different from the inside. Bigger than any place Eliza had ever lived in, but strangely hollow. The polished floors echoed beneath every footstep. A grandfather clock ticked somewhere deep in the hallway, like it was counting down to something nobody wanted to face. A maid passing through the dining room slowed when she saw Eliza, then kept walking without a word. Wade noticed it too. "Your room's upstairs," he said. Eliza glanced around carefully. Mounted antlers lined the walls. Oil lamps flickered against dark cedar beams. A silver-framed photograph sat crooked near the staircase. Wade as a younger man beside another cowboy somewhere in New Mexico territory. Both smiling, both sunburned. She had trouble imagining the man beside her smiling like that now. A tall, older ranch hand appeared from the kitchen doorway, wiping grease from his hands with a rag. Cole Turner. His eyes moved from Wade to Eliza slowly. "You serious about this?" he asked quietly. "Yes." Cole studied Eliza for another second before nodding once. Then folks'll need time. That's their problem, Wade replied. But Eliza could already feel it. The silence in the house changed whenever she entered a room. At breakfast the next morning, conversation stopped around the long table near the kitchen. Tin coffee cups lowered slowly. One of the younger cowboys nearly burned his biscuits because he kept staring. Eliza sat stiffly beside the window, while rainwater dripped from the roof outside. Wade barely touched his food. He signed supply receipts between bites, feed invoices, rail transport notices, bank letters with red stamps across the corners. Silver Spur was bleeding money faster than she realized. Around noon, Wade disappeared with a group of riders heading north toward the canyon trails. No goodbye. Just the sound of horses pulling away through mud. The house became even colder after that. By evening, old Martha arrived from town carrying 2 jars of peach preserves wrapped in cloth. I figured somebody around here ought to act human, she muttered. Eliza smiled faintly. Martha leaned closer while unpacking the jars. Town's already talking, I figured. They're calling you the fake ranch wife. Eliza lowered her eyes toward the coffee in her cup. The steam had already faded. Martha reached over and squeezed her hand once. People out here fear change more than drought, she said softly. That night, the temperature dropped hard across Red Hollow. Wind rattled the ranch windows after midnight. Eliza sat awake in her room sewing a torn horse blanket beneath lamplight when she heard footsteps outside her door. Slow, heavy, she froze. The footsteps stopped. A second later came the soft scrape of wood against the floorboards. Then silence. Eliza waited nearly a minute before opening the door carefully. A stack of firewood sat beside the wall, fresh-cut cedar, still smelling like the mountains. Wade was already halfway down the hallway, walking back toward his room without looking at her. "Storm's getting colder," he said simply. Then he disappeared around the corner. The next few days passed the same way. Quiet mornings, cold dinners, long silences, but little things kept happening. A broken porch step got repaired before sunrise. Her sister's medicine arrived from Tucson, wrapped carefully in brown paper. One afternoon, Eliza found a new set of stitching needles beside her saddle tools, without anyone mentioning them. Wade never explained any of it, and somehow that made it matter more. Then came the rainstorm. It rolled down from the mountains just after dark, while Eliza was helping settle the horses inside the barn. Thunder shook the valley. So hard dust drifted from the rafters. One frightened mare kicked open part of a stall gate. Eliza grabbed the reins before the horse bolted. "You're gonna lose her left leg if you keep that shoe loose," she called over the storm. Wade looked surprised. "You know horses? I grew up around freight mules." Rain hammered the tin roof above them. For the first time since arriving at Silver Spur, Wade looked at her like he was actually seeing her. Not as a problem, not as a dealer. Lightning flashed white through the cracks in the barn walls. The mare settled slowly beneath Eliza's hand. Neither of them spoke for a while after that. Just the storm, the horses breathing, water dripping from Wade's hat onto the dirt floor. Then Eliza noticed something sticking halfway out from beneath the ledger books near the tack shelf. A folded document. Official county paper. She picked it up casually, and her stomach tightened. Blank marriage registration forms, unsigned, no county seal, no filing stamp. Their marriage did not exist. Outside, thunder rolled across the Arizona desert. Inside the barn, Wade slowly took the papers from her hand. Neither of them moved. "If the bank finds out," Eliza said quietly, "this whole thing falls apart." Wade's jaw tightened slightly. "I know, and my sister loses the medicine." Another silence. Rain hammered harder overhead. Finally, Wade looked at her. "I said I'd protect you, but can you?" He didn't answer right away, and somehow that frightened her more than anything else. The rain finally eased near dawn. By morning, cold air had settled across Silver Spur Ranch like a heavy blanket. Thin frost clung to the fence rails outside the bunkhouse. The horses breathed steam into the pale Arizona sunrise. Eliza barely slept. She kept thinking about the unsigned papers, about how quickly this entire life could disappear. At breakfast, Wade sat at the far end of the long table reading telegrams beside a cup of black coffee gone untouched. The bruise near his jaw had turned darker overnight. Nobody spoke much. Only the sound of forks against tin plates and wind scratching softly at the windows. Then one of the stable boys burst through the kitchen door. 2 more horses down. Every chair scraped back at once. By noon, the whole ranch smelled of medicine, sweat, and wet hay. Some sickness had spread through the stables during the cold snap. Horses that had survived brutal cattle drives were suddenly too weak to stand. Wade moved through the chaos without slowing down once, checking temperatures, ordering fresh water hauled from the creek, sending riders toward Tucson for supplies. But it wasn't enough. One of the ranch hands muttered quietly near the stalls, "Might have to put half the herd down." Eliza looked sharply toward the sick mare trembling against the wooden gate. "No," she said. The men turned toward her. She stepped into the stall carefully, speaking low while running her hand along the horse's neck. "She's overheated. Blankets are trapping the fever." Nobody moved. Wade watched silently from the barn doorway. Eliza loosened the heavy wool cover and motioned toward the water buckets. "Cold cloths. Keep changing them every hour." One cowboy frowned. "That ain't gonna fix." "It kept freight horses alive during the summer fever outside Tombstone," she said without raising her voice. The barn fell quiet. Finally, Wade nodded once. "Do what she says." That changed something. Not all at once, but enough. By the 3rd day, several horses were standing again. Cowboys who once avoided speaking to Eliza now tipped their hats slightly when passing her near the stables. One older ranch hand even handed her fresh coffee during the morning rounds without saying a word. Small things, but real. Late one evening, Wade still hadn't returned from the northern grazing trail. The temperature dropped fast after sunset. Eliza sat near the kitchen stove repairing torn reins, while old Martha stirred beans in a cast-iron pot. "You care about him already," Martha said quietly. Eliza kept sewing. "He's my employer," Martha snorted softly. "Sure he is." Before Eliza could answer, hoofbeats thundered across the yard outside. Voices followed, urgent ones. The kitchen door flew open. Cole Turner entered carrying Wade half-conscious over his shoulder. Blood soaked through Wade's coat sleeve. "He got jumped near Dry Creek," Cole said breathlessly. Everything after that blurred together. Hot water, boiling on the stove. Scissors cutting fabric. The sharp smell of whiskey poured over a wound. Wade sat shirtless in a wooden chair near the fireplace, while Eliza stitched the gash along his shoulder beneath trembling lamplight. His skin burned with fever. Still, he barely made a sound. Only once did his hand tighten hard against the chair. "Almost done," Eliza whispered. Wade's eyes stayed half-closed. Outside, wind rattled the ranch windows again. Then suddenly he spoke. Eliza, her hands paused. "Not Miss, not Mom, her name." Slow and rough through the fever, she looked up carefully. Wade was staring at her without really seeing the room around him anymore. For one long second, something passed between them that neither one knew how to explain. Then the moment disappeared. Cole cleared his throat softly near the doorway. "I'll check the horses." He left quietly. Eliza finished wrapping the bandage, while Wade leaned back weakly against the chair. "You should rest," she said. But Wade caught her wrist gently before she stepped away. His hand was warm from the fever. "You stayed." Eliza swallowed. "So did you." Neither of them let go right away. Weeks later, during the winter festival in Red Hollow, people still whispered when they walked past together. But Wade no longer seemed to notice. Lanterns swung above the town square while a fiddler played near the saloon porch. Snow dusted the distant mountains beyond town. Eliza stood near the edge of the crowd, warming her hands around a tin cup of cider when Wade appeared beside her in a dark wool coat. "You hiding out here?" he asked. "I prefer quiet." He studied her for a second, then held out his hand. The music drifted softly through the cold night air. Every eye in town seemed to turn toward them. Eliza. She hesitated only a moment before placing her hand in his. Wade pulled her gently into the center of the dance floor. And somewhere across the square, Vivian Mercer, watched them without blinking once. The fiddle music carried softly through the cold night air, while boots scraped across old wooden planks dusted with snow. Eliza could feel every eye in Red Hollow following them. Not long ago, people lowered their voices when she walked past. Now, the most feared rancher in Arizona territory had his hand resting lightly against her waist in front of the entire town. Wade danced slower than she expected, careful, like a man more familiar with horses than people. "You're staring," Eliza said quietly, "making sure you don't disappear." The words settled somewhere deep inside her before she could stop them. A gust of winter wind pushed through the square. Lantern flames flickered above the crowd. Across the street, Vivian stood beside a black carriage wearing a dark velvet coat trimmed with fur. Her father's railroad men lingered behind her smoking cigars beneath the saloon awning. Vivian lifted her chin slightly when Wade looked her way. Not angry, certain. That frightened Eliza more. The music ended moments later. Applause scattered politely through the crowd while couples drifted apart toward warm cafes and whiskey bars. Wade kept hold of Eliza's hand a second longer than necessary. Then Deputy Boone stepped into their path. The silver badge on his coat caught the lantern light. "Evening," Boone said. Nobody answered immediately. Boone glanced toward Eliza. "Town clerk says he can't find any marriage filing for you two." The square suddenly felt quieter. Wade's expression never changed. Must misplaced it. Maybe. Boone studied them carefully. But funny thing is, county records tend not to disappear. Snow crunched beneath someone's boots nearby. Eliza felt Wade move slightly closer beside her. Not possessive, protective. Boone finally tipped his hat. "Have a good night." But he didn't look convinced when he walked away. The ride back to Silver Spur happened mostly in silence. Moonlight stretched pale across the desert while their horses moved steadily through frozen brush and red canyon shadows. "You should have told me sooner," Eliza said finally. Wade kept his eyes on the trail ahead. "I was trying to fix it before anyone noticed." Well, they noticed. A muscle moved in his jaw. "I know, far off," a coyote cried somewhere across the valley. When they reached the ranch house, most of the lamps had already gone dark. Only the kitchen still glowed faintly through the windows. Inside, Cole Turner sat alone at the table, drinking coffee from a chipped enamel mug. He looked up the second they entered. "We got trouble." Wade removed his gloves slowly. "What kind?" Cole tossed a folded paper across the table. Railroad purchase contracts, land maps, Silver Spur property lines marked heavily in black ink. "Eliza ain't the only thing Vivian's been working on," Cole muttered. Wade unfolded another page. His face hardened immediately. "Eastern Capital and Land Company. The same bank threatening the ranch. They're buying land around Dry Creek," Eliza said quietly. Cole nodded. "Railroad expansion." Wade stared at the documents in silence. Then another realization hit him. They're driving property values down first. Cole leaned back in his chair. "And somebody inside this ranch keeps feeding them information." The room went still. Only the ticking clock near the stove moved. Eliza looked toward the dark hallway leading deeper into the house. All at once, the ranch no longer felt lonely. It felt watched. The next few days changed everything, cowboys whispered when Wade walked past. Supply wagons arrived late. One herd nearly got diverted onto Mercer land after incorrect directions appeared in the route ledger. Someone inside Silver Spur was sabotaging them piece by piece, and Wade was running out of time. Late one evening, Eliza sat alone in the office sorting freight receipts beside an oil lamp while wind rattled the windows outside. Most people assumed she couldn't read numbers quickly. They were wrong. Her mother used to keep shipping accounts for a freight company outside Santa Fe before the fever took her. That was why Eliza noticed it first. Several cattle payments listed under false transport costs, railroad fees that didn't exist, money quietly disappearing. The office door opened behind her. Wade stepped inside carrying 2 cups of coffee. "You're still awake. So are you." He handed her 1 cup. Their fingers brushed briefly. Warm, familiar now. Wade loosened his coat and sat across from her. For a moment neither of them spoke. just the sound of papers shifting beneath lamplight. Then Eliza slid one receipt toward him. "You've been robbed." Wade frowned. She pointed toward the numbers carefully. "These charges are fake." He stared at the page, then another, then another. Slowly, his expression darkened. "Cole was right," he said quietly. "Somebody inside your ranch is helping them." Outside, the wind howled harder across Silver Spur Ranch, and somewhere beyond the dark stables, a shadow moved silently past the barn windows before disappearing into the night. But years later, folks in Red Hollow stopped talking about the fire, or the bank, or even the railroad men who nearly swallowed the valley whole. They talked about Wade Bennett standing in that old barn, with soot on his face, looking at the woman he almost lost, because he waited too long to say what mattered. And they talked about Eliza Brooks walking back through smoke and fear anyway. Maybe that's the part that stays with you, because most people know what it feels like to carry scars quietly, to build walls so high nobody can reach the softer parts underneath. And maybe, if you've lived long enough, you know how rare it is to find someone willing to stay when life turns difficult and ugly and uncertain. Wade thought strength meant surviving alone. Eliza taught him it could also mean trusting somebody enough to hand them your future. That little ranch out in Arizona Territory never became the richest place in the West, but it became a home. And sometimes that's worth more than land or cattle or railroad money ever could be. So if this story reminded you of someone you once loved, or someone who stayed beside you during the hard winters of your life, tell us about them down in the comments. And if you'd like, stay a while longer with us here. There are still more stories waiting out beyond the campfire light. Stories about lonely people finding family, broken hearts healing slow, and the strange ways love can appear where nobody expects it.